Show the world you care. Show the world we care.
Good evening. Many of you will know that for, oh my gosh, so many years now, I have been advocating on behalf of child abuse survivors, particularly children who, in this community, I have found that oftentimes it's the case that their voice is extremely limited, if heard at all. I have made it my passion in life to try to educate myself as much as possible about this topic. I've spoken to countless victims over the past 15 to 20 years. I have spoken to law enforcement officers, lawyers, just everyone who's involved in the process. In fact, many of you may not know that I'm actually working on a certification in this specific area to be a properly certified child advocate. So that if we ever get to the point in our development where we actually have child advocacy, specialized child advocacy representatives, that I could be considered for one of those positions. We don't have that level of sophistication when it comes to, unfortunately, dealing with our children here in the Cayman Islands who've been subjected to abuse and neglect and so many instances. Sometimes it's in the home, sometimes it's in the schools, churches, and so on. So, a lot of times I go to court. As you guys know, these cases are of interest to me because I want to watch how they're handled. Ultimately, whether the person gets off or not is also obviously of interest. I report in these cases. Sometimes I find that I'm the only court reporter that's there, keeping an eye on the situation. A lot of these cases may not seem all of that important to different members of the community. Who cares? It's just a kid. And of course, my heart is broken when I hear people take that approach because our children are our most precious commodity. Yes, it's wonderful that the government wants to do a lot with the environment. I applaud their efforts. I support those efforts. And I'm really, really happy that, the economy is a focus because at the end of the day, if we can't pay our bills, we're all going to be suffering. We're all going to have issues. But if we don't start to really dedicate some time to addressing the issues that matter, the social issues that matter the most to our children. And yes, children need to be able to eat in order to focus in school. But do you know that they also need to be free from abuse, free from predators in their homes, in their churches, in their youth groups, in their schools, in order to also be, able to live happily, freely, and become productive members of our community? I just feel like it's one of those issues that continues to be largely neglected by the powers that be. So, for the past week, I have been going to court listening to this very, very interesting case. It is a father who was alleged to have committed defilement. He was facing some 7 counts. It ranged from mere touching. You could see anybody who knows about child sexual abuse, you could see what was happening. So he started off with the grooming process, which was touching, rubbing up against, and that sort of thing before it led to allegedly full out rape of his own child. And it's one of those situations where, unfortunately, he has been vindicated. He has been found, I shouldn't say vindicated, but he has been found not guilty by a juror of his peers. So they sat there for a week and they heard the evidence and they found that the Crown did not make out their case to the level that is required of a criminal prosecution. And so he was set free. And I had a lot of issues, with the verdict. I had a lot of issues with things that I was hearing, both testimony from him that demonstrated his ignorance as a parent and also even other people who have access to this child. Now, no one is born knowing everything about child rearing. We all have to learn it from somewhere. Most of us, quite frankly, learn how to be a parent from our own parents. And if we didn't have the best example, well, God knows we are bound to repeat history. It's very few individuals that are able to break out of any sort of cycle, whether it's a cycle of abuse, a cycle of trauma, a cycle of narcissism, a cycle of, psychological games that families often play with each other. Whatever the case may be, it is very, very difficult to recognize the patterns that have held you prisoner for far so long and to try to evolve beyond that. Most of us need professional help in order to go to that next step. And if you don't have the ability to recognize it, the chances of you actually getting the help that you need is probably going to be slim to none. So as I sat there and I listened to this father, right, say that he didn't do it, that his young child, his young daughter, 9, 10, 11 years old, is lying on him and fabricating the story completely because she's upset because he said no to her. I hear him hyper focusing on her at the age of 10, wanting to hug her friends, and he sees that behavior as some sort of a sexual act, and he doesn't want her to be a lesbian. Like, all of these things were disturbing, and in some ways separate and apart from the allegations that were actually being made against him. So he has sole custody of the child, and I can't go into too many details because, of course, we don't want to give away anything that would identify the child, right? But he has sole custody of this child pretty much her entire life. DCFS, Department of Family Services, was at some point involved in her life. And it occurred to me that it's so incredibly professionally negligent of them to give a father sole custody of a child. He comes from overseas, from another jurisdiction. He gets full custody of a child, and then he's responsible for raising that child. What support mechanisms would have been in place to check in on the child? Were they doing house visits? In other jurisdictions, we've heard of their equivalent of family services dropping the ball in so many instances that sometimes have led to the death of young children or children in the care of either a foster parent or, their primary caretaker. So this made me wonder, what legal obligation does the Department of Family Services have once they have released a child into the custody of a parent? If a child has ever been flagged by DCFS or been in their care, is there any follow-up, any degree of continuity when it comes to their case management or their assessment, ongoing assessment of the child's well-being and safety? Is anybody coming to say, how are you doing? How are you getting along? Every 6 months, doing a random spot check visit, speaking to the child separately, making sure the child can get into programs like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. We know that children who grow up in single family homes are automatically in an adverse situation, and they will struggle more than children who grow up traditionally in a 2-parent household, right? Now, that's compounded by other issues in this case, which, like I said, I'm not going to go into. But any young girl who does not have a mother in the home, you could understand how she herself, as she comes into her own, into the preteens and the teenage years, will struggle because there's certain conversations that certainly she cannot have with her father, right? Now, she alleges that this man actually he raped her. That's what she alleges. On 4 separate occasions, he raped her. There was defilement. There was, other types of, according to the child, sexual abuse that was happening. At no point did she feel confident enough to admit it to anyone for a number of years. I suspect it's because there was really no one there in her life who she could confide in, who she had continued to have a strong relationship with. The state has an obligation to the children in their care, as well as any child that has been in their care, to continue to do these types of follow-ups, right? I get that they're busy and they have a humongous caseload because, trust me, if you ever go to court and you hear the reports that they have to produce, the delays in court cases that are caused because, somebody's out with COVID, somebody's out sick, even before COVID existed, there were constant delays from rehabilitation services. Oh, they're short-staffed, and they're trying to get someone. I remember at one point a magistrate actually saying, this man was supposed to have started, a counseling program for his drug addiction, as well, I think it was alcohol, as well as his domestic violence history. And it was coming close to the holidays, and he wanted to spend the holidays with his family. But unfortunately, because he had not attended the counseling, and no fault of his own, rehabilitative services was just that busy, because he hadn't attended any of the counseling services. Unfortunately, he was not going to be eligible. The judge was finding it very difficult to make him, able to go and visit his family for the holidays. We need to focus more on these types of programs. And I feel like they really go under the radar. Yes, people need homes. People need physical homes. But a physical structure does not make that building a home. That building becomes a home when it is safe for the occupants in the home and the physical structure, right? Where mothers and fathers don't have to be subjected to psychological and emotional abuse or physical abuse, sexual abuse. Where children can go home and they feel like that's a safe haven. One of the most disturbing things that came out of this is that this man has had a number of rental properties during the time that he's had custody of this child. Every single rental property he gets is a 1-bedroom. And that raised an eyebrow for me, because I thought, where is the child staying? And this was part of the questioning, the line of questioning that came out by the prosecution. Where does the child stay? Oh, well, we sleep in the same bed, but we sleep like she's turned the opposite way, sort of thing. Come on, folks. No adult male should be wanting to sleep in a bed with a child, especially a young lady now coming into her own. I don't care what direction you think you're sleeping. We've all slept in a bed before, and you turn and you twist all night, and sometimes your foot ends up in one direction, the opposite direction of where you started. And it's like he saw nothing wrong with that, right? Oh, he can only afford a 1-bedroom, so that's what he gets. And it made my skin crawl. It made my spine tingle to hear that was being said. And as though that was somehow the norm and that was okay. And again, I'm thinking, where is DCFS? If it's the case that he needed some financial assistance to be able to afford a 2-bedroom unit, where this young lady could have privacy, undressing and putting on her clothes and dressing, would that not have been something that they could have assisted through NAU with? We, I think, as a community, agencies, put children in harm's way and don't think about it until after the fact. Now, I want to make it very clear. A jury of his peers decided that the Crown didn't make out their case. I was talking to a lawyer recently, and he said, listen, this is how these things work. He remembers a case where the judge said, oh, am I going to hear the facts in this case? This is a case back in the UK. And the lawyer said, no, Your Honor, you're not going to hear the facts. You're going to hear the evidence. This now brings me to the point of the police investigation. We have a MASH unit, which has brought all of the relevant agencies together under one central physical umbrella, so that when they get a report of a case, the idea is that they're supposed to work in unison to try to bring this case a successful prosecution. And hopefully, at the end of the day, protecting the victim. That should be their first remit. However, we have officers who are taking conduct of these cases who are clearly not trained to be able to do so. They are carrying out investigations that are flawed. And that's what happened in this case. His defense attorney was able to point out several things that the police should have done that they simply didn't do when it comes to the collecting of evidence, the verification of certain things, and putting their case together to be as strong as it could be. So then the prosecution can only do so much with what they have. It is quite unfortunate, actually. When the police officer came in and testified, her attitude was less than becoming. And it was taught after her evidence was given. She was getting defensive with the defense, right? Getting rude, outright rude. And you think to yourself, does a police officer who's worked in the force for umpteenth years not recognize that the way in which they give testimony, their attitude, may have an impact on a jury and may help you to lose a case, in fact? And so you have to answer the questions that are being asked of you and not take it personal, not get offended, not bring an attitude to the courthouse, and not bring an attitude to the lawyer who's questioning you about how your investigation was carried out. So the police department now has a responsibility to get their act together. And we know that historically they've had a very difficult time with these types of cases. And I think there's a number of reasons why that happens. Number one, I believe that they do not have people who are properly trained with the extensive knowledge and experience of handling child abuse cases. Now, if there's one thing that we should invest in, we can invest in pilots, bringing them overseas, claiming that they're the ones who can use this multi-million-dollar helicopter. And we can bring in people who are investigative experts, forensic investigative experts as it relates to financial services. Can we not bring in, for the sake of protecting our children, someone who has experience dealing with child abuse cases? I mean, years of experience, someone who would be lauded as an expert in that particular area. Why are we still allowing a regular detective to learn how to do this on the job with the RCIPS at the expense of our children? It just doesn't make any sense. Right? It's very, very unfortunate, because in most of the cases, it means that they will not be a successful prosecution. Now, after a case is finished, it also occurred to me that there's no degree of review or debriefing. So this case is done. He's gotten off. I think he might have another case pending, but he's gotten off on this one. What now? Are they going to return this child to his care? A child who has accused him, despite the verdict, this child has still accused her father of raping her on multiple occasions. And he has said in a court of law that he's the type of person who will chastise and beat his child. And, he believes that this has damaged their relationship. And he doesn't really seem like the type of person, I'm going to be very frank here with you, who could probably forgive and forget if this child has lied on him, which I don't personally believe that that's what happened. But if that was the case, he would be one of those parents that you should never give this child back to. My question now becomes, what happens to this child? She's got many, many years ahead of her before she can be an adult and move out on her own. What is the state going to do? What is DCFS going to do with this child? Even the current caregiver that they have with a child who's fostered many, many children over the years, right? She's saying that when asked about, have you had a conversation with this young lady about the bees, the bees and the birds, appropriate sex conversation. She herself doesn't really seem to understand what that entails. Her response was, oh yeah, we talked about, but same sex stuff. We are such a community that is hyper-focused on same-sex relationships, as though that's the only thing that you need to be worried about in this community. Forget about the child molesters. Forget about the people who are abusing your children. You just don't want them to be a gay or lesbian, and that's it. They can be abused. They can be sexually abused. That's okay. As long as they're not gay or lesbian, because that's the sex conversation that you're going to have with them. Oh, don't let a woman approach you. But let's not talk about, is your father touching you? Is your father approaching you? Has your father ever done anything to you? And they wonder why kids and young people won't open up to them when they're being abused. Because the only thing they've ever been told that's a priority is lesbianism and homosexuality. So bless her little heart for being there for children in her community. But when I heard that line of questioning, I heard the responses, I was concerned once again about who we are in carrying our children to. It's sad. Children need help. And as a community, we should be there for them. So one recommendation I have is that after every case of this nature, it'd be great if they could do it with all cases, but particularly child abuse cases that relate to children, can we have some sort of post-case management hearing with the judges, with the defense, with the prosecution? Because again, it's not about the facts, it's about the evidence and what you can prove. With DCFS, with all the elements of the MASH unit, which include the RCIPS? Can we have all of those agencies come together? Have debriefing notes. Prosecution talks about why they think they lost the case. Is it because the police didn't do their jobs? Right? The defense was able to poke these holes in their arguments because the police didn't collect data properly, because the doctor had never even been informed when she was examining the child that this was a sexual abuse allegation. She was just told to do a general examination. So she couldn't talk about any of those aspects of the case. Her testimony was pretty much useless to the prosecution. Why is that? You know, as we continue to grow in population size, we will find that, and just going through, our historical development, we'll find that more and more of these cases come to light for a variety of different reasons. I think more people are reporting them. Before, they were likely to get completely swept under the rug and completely hidden. But if a victim reports something like this and then gets no justice at the end of it, you could understand why it's going to be one of those situations where it will deter others from even coming forward. So is the MASH unit doing any sort of debriefing with the respective parties involved? Call in the defense attorney, review what their arguments were and how you lost the case. Prosecution can give you some contributing remarks. What about this child now? She's made a very serious allegation. Whether you believe her or not, she's made a very serious allegation. My primary concern is, will she be returned to that home? And even if she's not returned to that home, will she be given counseling? Whether you believe her or not, clearly this is a young lady who has said she has been through a very traumatic situation. Will she be given the benefit of some counseling? Specialized counseling. Again, we need to have experts who know how to deal with child abuse survivors. A general therapist is not going to be the most efficient person, most effective person to deal with this type of a case. Do we have any of those individuals on hand? What's their caseload like? Are they able to even manage? How long before she's able to get a therapy session? There's just so many questions for me that, having walked away from this case, I'm just left, unanswered. I just don't know. And so these are recommendations on how I think we could work to make the system better. That's ultimately my goal. Yes, I want to see every single child molester convicted. But even in the instances where they're not convicted, I think that there are lessons to be learned along the way about how to tighten the investigation process. And that should happen. Because time and time again, we have top-notch lawyers, both defense and prosecutorial attorneys, going head to head, right? Doing their best. In more cases than not, they're not getting a conviction. Do we even know the numbers? When was the last time somebody told us, well, X number of abuse cases came to court this year, and of those, this is how many were successfully prosecuted and how many got away? Because those numbers would surely tell you a lot. It's a sad case. Anyway, folks, this is another segment of me just sharing my opinion with you. Remember, you're able to share your opinion on any topic that you wish. Send it to us in a little video vlog. We'll put it up for you as an editorial segment. We're always happy to do that. There's so many social issues that we face as a community. And I think that if we don't put our collective minds together to try to solve those cases, and try to better the lives of people in the community beyond the brick and mortar, beyond just finding them jobs, we will only ever get so far. And the mental health and well-being of the people in our community and our society, to me, you can't put a price tag on those things at all. That's just how important it is. So I hope that someone is listening to this, somebody with, the ability to hopefully do something, to listen to the recommendations, to say, oh, you know what? Regardless of who's making the recommendation, that's actually a really good idea. Let's take that on board. let's start having some post-case management hearings. Let's start having some debriefing sessions over at the MASH unit. Let's see where we went wrong. Let's start issuing reports so the public can also know what we've been up to, how many cases we've had, where we are going wrong, and where we will get better. Hire some specialists on the police force, some specialist counselors, right? Seek to train officers who are currently in the ranks up to that level, but it's not the sort of thing that happens overnight, unfortunately. That would be my wish. Thank you so much for listening.
Raise your voices, it's not fair. Every time, everywhere. Be a hero, show the world.